Hello there and a very good evening. Welcome to the People's Platform here on News First on TV1. For the News First team, I am Jayamal Ratnayaka. Have you ever heard of supply chains? Chances are that you have heard of supply chains because supply chains and value chains, or these sorts of aspects, are very important to economies, to global trade and to countries. Supply chain ensures that the components of whatever industry or whatever product that you're using, from your mobile phone to your motor vehicle, comes together and makes one unified product. And in recent days, there has been a shift in the global value chain. To talk about this, we have invited to our studios tonight Subhashini Abhay-Singha, Research Director attached to Verite Research. Thank you very much, Subhashini, for joining me this evening.
Thank you very much for inviting.
Subhashini, let's get into the topic straight away. I want to first ask you about the global perspective and how traditionally value chains have been formed and designed. We know, like I said in my introduction, that there is a rethink in global supply chain models, value chain models, and so on, that is mainly due to a plethora of reasons such as supply uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, inflationary pressures, and so on. We know that there is a war going on in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, and there are also tensions between China and the US. Against such a backdrop, China, that has been traditionally regarded as the go-to destination for a lot of manufacturers, has somewhat contracted in terms of being the hub of production in global trade and the world as a whole. And there is now a greater need for companies to get closer to the customer in order to satisfy faster response to changing demands, to avoid tariffs in other countries, and also to cut logistical costs. And we have also started hearing about a China Plus One strategy. So how is this rethink taking shape, Subhashini? Do you feel like this rethink is something considerable, something that will actually cause a dynamic shift in the global value chain?
Yes, Jamal. So let me first take a step back and really tell the audience why we are talking about global value chains or global supply chains, and why are they important.
Yes.
Because we are today in an economic crisis, and one of the main reasons in this economic crisis is a lack of foreign exchange. We don't have dollars in our economy, and we have borrowed dollars, but we have not earned dollars, so that we are unable to pay back. So Sri Lanka's problem has been that Sri Lanka has not really expanded avenues of earning foreign exchange.
Right.
And this is where global value chains come in, because if you contrast Sri Lanka's export performance with most successful countries that manage to grow their exports,
Right.
like Vietnam, like Thailand, like Malaysia, and you see the major difference for Sri Lanka's sluggish growth and their exponential growth in exports is actually our inability to join global value chains and their ability to join global value chains.
Right.
So why it is very important is these global value chains emerged actually around 3 decades ago first. They emerged because there was a massive reduction in trade barriers.
Right.
There was rapid advances in information and communication technology, reduction in costs of ICT, and rapid advancements in transport technology, and also especially containerization and reduction in maritime transport costs. All of this made most of the global firms realize actually we can reduce cost of production by producing most of our parts and components of products in multiple countries, because we can have the same predictability, same synergy, and do the manufacturing and give the consumer the final product at a lower cost. That is why we say Apple is manufactured in so many different countries, not in a single country. And today most of the vehicles are parts and components are manufactured in different countries and assembled in a different country. And these value chains emerged seeking lower costs, right? And when these global companies decided to actually say, we are going to manufacture parts and components in a lot of different countries, that means they are going to invest in these countries. And most of the Southeast Asians, what they did was they opened up their economies to these foreign direct investments for these global companies to come and invest in their countries to manufacture these parts and components. And this global value chain related trade grew so fast. Today, actually about 50% of the global trade is in intermediate products, these parts and components.
Right.
And it is higher in the Asian region. Around 60% of intra-regional trade in Asia is parts and components.
Right.
But unfortunately, Sri Lanka failed to be part of this. Sri Lanka did not manage to secure these investments and really export. If you compare Southeast Asian countries and Sri Lanka, if you look at your export basket, today these global value chain related exports of Sri Lanka accounts for about 5% of Sri Lanka's total exports. In contrast, in countries like Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines and Vietnam, they account for over 40%. And if you just get a number to show how Sri Lanka, what's the impact of Sri Lanka losing these opportunities, compare ourselves with Vietnam, right? Both are lower middle income economies. Vietnam and Sri Lanka in 1993 exported around $3 billion of exports. Both were at the same level. Today, Sri Lanka exports 13 billion, whereas Vietnam exports 335 billion. So Sri Lanka's exports grew 4 times, Vietnam's export grew 111 times, right? And Sri Lanka, unfortunately, although we graduated from a low income to a middle income economy, we saw our exports to GDP ratio from 2000, if you take 2000 to 2021, declined from over 30% to 15%.
I see.
If you see Vietnam, it grew from around slightly above 40% to today to reach 90% of their GDP. So we missed this massive opportunity. And around early 21st century, the global value chains had stabilized. They were not looking for new destinations. They were not looking for new suppliers.
Yes.
So if you speak to a lot of manufacturers, they would say, now if we want to join global value chains, we have to unplug an existing supplier and plug ourselves in. Now that's a very, very difficult task. So what you're talking about today is a new opportunity that Sri Lanka is getting, because, like you said, global value chains are getting reconfigured. And this reconfiguration happened because we all know, we call China the factory of Asia. All these value chains were centered around China. And all of a sudden, because of the geopolitical tensions, China has become a geopolitical hotspot, and also COVID-19 pandemic made companies take a step back and realized, did we invest less on supply chain resilience, the ability of supply chains to withstand shocks, in our quest for lower costs?
Right.
So all of a sudden they are taking a step back and realizing, okay, lower costs are important, but actually especially with the supply chain disruptions during COVID-19 and the current growing tensions between US, China, and now it's becoming Western China, and the economic sanctions and other restrictions and possible military aggression, they are saying, look, I need to now invest in supply chain resilience.
Right.
And this China Plus strategy that you mentioned is part of this effort of these global companies to become more resilient in their supply chains. So what they're trying to say is, look, I can't be over dependent on China. That is too much of a risk. I need to diversify my export, my supply chains. And in this process, they're looking for new destinations to invest.
Right.
And they didn't do it before. And that is the opportunity. And what is interesting is, it is not only Sri Lanka that missed the global value chains, actually entire South Asia did. For the first time, they are seeing India as an opportunity and as a location that they can have in their China Plus One strategy. And a lot of large global companies like Apple, Samsung, Mercedes-Benz, and a lot of Japanese investors are really looking at India as their next destination. And what that means for Sri Lanka is, global value chains were earlier in your neighborhood, but now they're coming to your doorstep. And this gives an opportunity, because now these investors are looking at South Asia as a potential location.
Right.
And Sri Lanka is nicely placed in a geographically strategic position where you can provide a large amount of services to these supply chains and become what Singapore maybe became to China, a connector. The connectivity, the logistics, and the related industries from packaging to labeling to assembly to inventory management, all of these that you can provide around your port becomes very important, and it's a very good opportunity if Sri Lanka wants to really make use of to have exponential growth in exports.
I see. Before we move into how Sri Lanka can benefit through this change in value chains, global value chains, and the shift, there are certain terms that are being thrown around. One such term being the China Plus One strategy, and then certain companies or certain countries have been swirling around with words such as nearshoring, friendshoring, and so on. So we know offshoring was when they essentially handed China the manufacturing part of their businesses. But now we are hearing words such as nearshoring and friendshoring. Can you also apprise us and our viewers on what those terms mean, Subhashini?
Yes, so what geopolitical tensions had done is, especially in certain sectors, it has made Western countries worried about being over-reliant on some of the other countries like China and Taiwan. So what they're trying to do is they're actively pursuing a strategy of trying to get their companies to invest back in their countries. That is reshoring. So for American companies, come back to America, manufacture in America, or nearshoring is come back to Mexico, Canada, manufacturing in the neighborhood. So that is also because with geopolitical tensions, there are a lot of national security concerns that come up, and especially strategic industries like semiconductors that, or chips that basically is so important, from mobile phones to computers to vehicles. And the problem with semiconductors or chips is that these are called dual-use products because it can be used for military purposes as well as civilian purposes. So there is growing worry because most of the advanced chips manufactured today in today's world, over 50% comes from Taiwan. And today Taiwan is considered a very geopolitically hot spot. And as a result, there is growing concerns in the West. Should we rely so much on Taiwan or be dependent on Taiwan for one of the most important products that is very important for all the products we use today and also for military purposes? So as a result, what they're doing is, for example, United States has passed an act called CHIPS Act, and also to incentivize companies to come and invest in United States, to manufacture in United States. So friendshoring is a term that people use to say, can we find geopolitically safe spots? Places where, will not become at the center of geopolitical tensions, where the disruptions to supply chains are lower. And I feel that is where Asia is winning. Asia is winning for two reasons. One is that they have somehow managed geopolitics, especially Southeast Asian nations have been able to navigate and manage geopolitical tensions well without taking any sides. And also India is seen as a friend, because although India has never been in the US camp, India has never said I'm pro-American, but what there's or anti-Russian or anti-Chinese, right? What is important about India and China is two important things that make, India and United States, that make them feel that they can work together is both of these countries consider China as a strategic competitor and a risk and maybe a threat as well. And compared to China, India we know is known as the world's largest democracy. So these two things make people feel that India is a geopolitically safe spot in this environment. And in addition to that, India has a lot of other advantages. That China used to attract a lot of investments for two reasons. One is because of its massive internal market. That means you have a lot of consumers. We all know some of the largest brands in the world, from Mercedes-Benz to Apple to everyone. Their sales have been growing rapidly in China. So they've been these other issues.
The human aspect is essentially taken out.
Increased. Then actually it is a loss for developing countries that actually try to grow their manufacturing and exports based on low-cost labor.
Right.
So it's an interesting developments in the global trading environment. One of the problems, Jamal, with Sri Lanka is that our export strategy has always been out of sync with global trends. So even today, I mean, when you look at Sri Lanka's statements about export strategy or export policy, I mean, a budget speech maybe a year ago or two ago endorsed an export strategy we made in 2018 or 2019, before the pandemic, before these geopolitical tensions, before this transition. And after this, also we are thinking we can go with that same export strategy as to grow our exports. Now, that's a big mistake. The world has changed tremendously, and there are a lot of challenges, but also a lot of opportunities. It's all about how you respond and make use of these opportunities.
Right. So, whilst we are in this topic, let's talk about Sri Lanka. You said that India is being earmarked by global companies as a potential destination to move their production, because it seems safer, it seems more resilient, it's not prone to geopolitical tensions and so on. And naturally, being situated right under India and the Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka surely can grasp this opportunity and make use of this opportunity to at least get some of the business that India is getting. However, when we take the ground situation at present in Sri Lanka, what needs to be done? Because we know Sri Lanka is placed in a very strategic position geopolitically, geographically. And although we have all of those aspects in place, there seems to be certain aspects missing from Sri Lanka when it comes to competing with international market, with international competitors and other manufacturers. Where does Sri Lanka need to improve, or what does Sri Lanka need to do in order to gain, one, the confidence of potential global firms, and also to become competitive and also deliver the same quality and standard that other maybe Southeast Asian countries are delivering?
Yes, I think I'll start with one example that contrasts India and Sri Lanka. So we are in a, when it comes to Japanese investments, right? So Japan is also a country that is trying to, Japanese firms are also trying to diversify their supply chains and reduce reliance on China. And in this process, you know, Japan has pledged to invest something like $49 billion in the coming few years in India. In contrast, I read a newspaper article in Sri Lanka where Japanese envoy to Sri Lanka was saying that Japanese companies have lost confidence in Sri Lanka.
Yes.
How unfortunate is this? At a time that Japanese companies are actively seeking to actively looking for other locations to invest, and Jamal, he was not referring to the current crisis as a reason. He was referring to the Sri Lanka's investment environment, our policy inconsistency rather, as the reasons for Japanese companies to lose confidence. So one of the most important things we need to understand is you can't grow exports without us being able to attract investments. So to attract investments, and this is like very bad messaging for Sri Lanka at a time where you want to get yourself in the map of these global companies, the map that has locations, right? So they call it the alternative Asia. So instead of China, they're looking at an alternative Asia that comprises of East Asian countries, India, and also Bangladesh is on that map, but not Sri Lanka. So what we need to understand is one of the reasons that Sri Lanka has failed to attract foreign direct investments is that, our investment environment, our approval process is not efficient, it's corrupt, there is a lot of bureaucratic red tape. So we have to really think of making it easy for people to come and invest. And it doesn't only affect, when you think about growing exports and investment, you're not only looking at foreign companies, even local companies. So making our investment ability to invest easy and having a consistent policy environment without tinkering and changing taxes all the time, the rules all the time, with little or no consultation.
Yes.
These are, and also making the investment approval process efficient and transparent, because Sri Lanka has been talking about a one-stop shop for investment for decades.
Yes.
We still don't see this one-stop shop. And it is the same if you want export-oriented investments into a country. You must also make your border procedures, your company's ability to bring in inputs and to export take out the final product easy and efficient.
Yes.
This is where, if you have heard of just like one-stop shop for investments, we have been talking for decades about a single window for Sri Lanka's border agencies that connect all border agencies in one platform, automate all the border agencies and allow traders and every other stakeholders to communicate with these border agencies online. We embarked on this project in 1993. Timing was right. It was really at the time where global value chains emerged. But what happened is 3 decades after, we don't have a single window. And there are other countries like India and Bangladesh who started later than us, have made far more progress than we have. So these are two critical aspects that Sri Lanka seriously needs to address if Sri Lanka is to make use of the current new opportunities that are emerging and coming to its doorstep.
I see. We are in conversation with Subhashini Abesinghe, Research Director attached to Verite Research. We're talking today about the changing dynamics of the global value chain and the opportunities that they create for Sri Lanka. We must now cross over for a short commercial break. However, we will be right back with the same topic. Stay tuned to the People's Platform.
දහස් ගණන් බැතිමතුන් නවතින පුදබිම සෙල්ල කතරගම. ගම්වාසීන්ට මෙන්ම පුදබිම වන්දනා කරන බැතිමතුන්ට නිදහසේ පිරිසිදු ජලය බීමට ජල පෙරණයක්. ගම්මැද්ද ජන සතු කළ වගයි. ගම්මැද්ද රට නගන සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 7ට.
ලෝකාර්ථිකයේත් කැළමිල්ලක් වෙනවා. අපේ ආර්ථිකයේ විශාල කැළඹිල්ලක් වෙනවා. කොවිඩ් යුගයෙන් පස්සේ ආර්ථිකය වෙනස් වෙලා තියෙනවා. ඉස්සර විදිහටම අපිට සැපයුම් ජාලේ වැඩ කරන්න අමාරුයි.
ආර්ථිකය කියන කොටස තියෙන්නේ ලේසි දැනක නෙමෙයි.
නෑ. කැළඹිල්ලක තියෙන. තාක්ෂණය හරහා මාධ්‍ය ව්‍යුහය සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම වෙනස් වෙනවා. අපිට හිතා ගන්න බෑනේ අපි පැනලා තියෙන පින්. ඒ පැන්න පින්ම හරහා උනේ විශාල පරිවර්තනයක්. අච්චර ආයතන පවතින්න පුළුවන්ද මේ වගේ කුඩා වෙළඳ පොළක කියන ප්‍රශ්නකුත් තියෙනවා. කුඩා වෙළඳ පොළකට පුවත්පතුත් වැඩි, විද්‍යුත් මාධ්‍යත් වැඩි.
විලිත් සමග නියමාර්ථය සෙනසුරාදා රාත්‍රී 9:30.
Welcome back to the People's Platform. We are in conversation with Subhashini Abesinghe, Research Director attached to Verite Research. We are talking about global value chains, the dynamic shift that is happening in global value chains and the opportunities they will create for Sri Lanka in the near future. Subhashini, we were talking about the local aspect and how Sri Lanka can benefit from the shift that is happening in global value chains and China's position as the global manufacturing hub changing, it moving towards India and the South Asian region. But we know that there are certain difficulties in Sri Lanka in terms of doing business. We talk about ease of doing business, registering a business, sourcing products, obtaining the necessary approval. Like you said right before the break, there's a lot of bureaucracy, there's a lot of red tape going around. Against such a backdrop, how does Sri Lanka implement policies? What sort of policies does Sri Lanka implement to ensure that small and medium scale enterprises and also large scale enterprises are allowed to become competitive and go into the global market and compete with global players? How does Sri Lankan policymakers facilitate this?
Yes, so Jamal, I will so we did a recent research to understand what we call trade facilitation measures. Trade facilitation basically is a term used to measures adopted to reduce the time and cost of trading across borders.
Okay.
So it involves simplifying procedures, streamlining procedures, automating procedures, just to make sure that you do not spend a lot of time and the cost of trading goods across borders is low. And this is very important area to invest. So we wanted to compare, everybody asks why is Sri Lanka failing compared to others. So one area we've realized is Sri Lanka has progressed very little in trade facilitation. One of the yardsticks that we can use is, World Trade Organization negotiated a trade, agreement called Trade Facilitation Agreement, and as a member of WTO, just like many other countries, Sri Lanka also is a signatory to the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. What is interesting is in this agreement, countries are allowed to basically say, to me, WTO TFA, that is normally the term that everybody uses, is like the basic of trade facilitation, right? If you look at countries like Singapore, South Korea, even Thailand and other countries, they've done a lot more to facilitate trade than what is in the WTO TFA, right? So we are taking one of the lowest benchmarks. It's not the highest benchmark. So let's look at how Sri Lanka fares against this lowest benchmark. So when you take the competitors of Sri Lanka, so we are talking about being competitive. That means can you do better than the other countries that supply products that you're supplying to the international market? And the list includes Thailand to Malaysia to India to Vietnam to Bangladesh to all of these countries, right? So what is interesting is that World Trade Organization has a database that tracks the level of implementation of these WTO trade facilitation measures. So if you look at, you have 3 types of commitments, something called a commitment A. Don't worry about the terminology. What basically says is, on the day the agreement came into effect, I am ready to implement these measures. That's basically the commitment A. So if you look at, to me, why commitment A is important is it tells you, has countries taken measures to improve trade facilitation before the WTO trade facilitation agreement, before WTO comes up with it, before you have to make commitments, that countries have done it on their own. That's a very good indication to me of how progressive a country had been to improve their trade environment and to make their companies competitive, right? So if you look at Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, all of these countries, even India, they had said Thailand, Malaysia, all of these countries said we are ready to implement over 90% of the measures in the agreement on the day the agreement came into effect. India said 70%, right? Now that shows these countries have done these things before WTO or anybody tells them to do, because they know this is important for their own country, right? Now, the ones that were at the same level, like Sri Lanka, was Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. Both were, Sri Lanka said something like 26%, we are ready. So, and even Vietnam said only 29%, and Bangladesh also was at that same level. Now, this agreement came into effect somewhere in 2014, right? Now, today, if you look at the implementation progress, so everyone else who was at 90 and 70% has reached 100%, right? Anyway, they had very little to do. Now, let's look at Vietnam and Sri Lanka. Now, Vietnam has implemented over 80%. Where is Sri Lanka? Sri Lanka has gone from something like 29% to 31%.
This
Now,
is over a period of how many
so
years?
between 2014 to today.
Today.
Right? And even Bangladesh has gone to 45%.
So
right?
2% in nearly a decade. 2 to 3%.
Exactly. So this shows, in my view, this shows the commitment of a country to improve its own competitiveness. And trade facilitation is not only important for improving your export competitiveness, it is very important to become an attractive investment destination for export-oriented companies.
Certainly.
Because that's something they look at, if I can't get in my inputs and take my products out with lowest cost and lowest time, why would I want to invest in a destination like that, right? And we are competing not only for trade, but also for investment with our neighbors,
Exactly.
right? So they look at all of these countries and decide, where do I want to invest? So Sri Lanka is losing investment competitiveness and also trade competitiveness by failing to do so. So another interesting area to basically look at is, how did these countries actually implement these measures, and why did Sri Lanka fail? So what is the most interesting finding by other research and our own is, actually, when it comes to trade liberalization, Jayamath, when you're thinking of reducing tariffs and all of that, it is the domestic industries and companies that resist, and because they're scared of losing their market, and they're the ones who resist. But when it comes to trade facilitation, it is the bureaucracy that resists. Because by simplifying, streamlining and automating, the bureaucracy loses the perks and privileges they have because of these opaque, manual and complex systems. Because you have to pay squeeze money. You have to pay money under the table to get your shipment
There's a lot
on
of
time.
kickbacks involved.
Exactly. So they wield enormous power, and as a result, they don't want to let go of it. So this is obviously not a challenge only Sri Lanka faces. So what you need to ask is, how did other countries succeed? Despite, obviously, their bureaucracy would have resisted as well. So one of the key factors that makes countries succeed is the commitment to implementation by the highest level. If you look at, if you look at Vietnam, it was their deputy prime minister who chaired the Trade Facilitation Committee. And when it comes at that highest level authority, there is direction, and also you need resources. If you want to automate, you need resources. You need training, you need capacity building. So somebody at a decision-making level and with the authority must sit there who can make decisions on these resource allocations. And this is true in India. It is what you call the cabinet secretary is the most senior bureaucrat in India. Now in Sri Lanka, you have to ask the question, who was chairing the Trade Facilitation Committee? It was the Director General of Sri Lanka Customs, right? It was co-chaired by the Director General of Department of Commerce. In entire world, not just Sri Lanka, Customs has been one of the organizations that has resisted trade facilitation reforms the most, because they stand to benefit the most from the opaque system, because they sit at the border and decide what goods can come in and what goods can go out, how much tax are you paying, and how all of that is decided by them. And they wield so much power over the traders, and they have a lot of other benefits that comes from that power. And the moment you have streamlined, automated system, you're losing that. And to put as the chair of the Trade Facilitation Committee that looks at all the border agencies, the Director General of Customs was basically, for me, for sure nothing will happen.
Yes, because...
And also, to be fair by the Director General, he can't, he's a head of a department, he can't make decisions on resource allocations, and he can't command or direct give directions to other department
Because he
heads
will
because
come
you are
with
at the
his
same
own set of vested
and also they are at the
interests.
same level of authority.
Yes.
Director General of Commerce to Director General of Department of Agriculture to Director General of Customs, they are at the same level of authority. One person can't give directions to another person and command action, and they are not in a place to decide on budget allocations. So this was a major mistake Sri Lanka did, and it's very important to correct it, and has basically recently there was a report that was actually by a commission that was actually appointed by previous President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. It was a presidential commission on inquiry about Sri Lanka customs, right? And actually before he stepped down, the commission handed over the report to the then President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who said that he will table it in the parliament, right? But it was never tabled in the parliament to this date. But one good thing is the current president, in his capacity as Minister of Finance, actually said in a budget speech that he is committed to implement the findings of the Presidential Commission report on customs, which was great, right? So when one of the most important recommendations of that commission report is that if you want to implement the recommendations of this report, it must be done through a very high-level committee chaired by the President or the Prime Minister, right? And do you know, when we filed the right to information request, to find out, what is the process in place and how much progress has been made in this commitment by the government to implement, we were informed that they have a committee chaired by an Assistant Director General of Customs. Now, a government that said we are committed to implement the Presidential Commission report findings has failed to implement the most important recommendations, that this will not succeed unless you have this very high-level committee driving it.
Right, understood. Unfortunately, we are coming towards the end of the show, but I must ask Subhashini, because Sri Lanka is located in such a geographically important location, and successive governments over the years have spoken about making Sri Lanka or transforming Sri Lanka into a maritime hub. What sort of a role will Sri Lanka's location, geographical location, play in terms of creating value for investors, in terms of supporting supply chains as a connector between manufacturers and the ultimate customer or the firms?
Actually, Jayamal, in my view, if Sri Lanka wants to transition itself from a developing country to an industrial country or a developed country, the only way we will be able to do it is if we are able to make use of our location like Singapore did. If we feel that is one of the greatest blessings this country has and the greatest natural assets we have, that unfortunately for so many years we have not been able to convert to benefit the country. It has been converted to benefit certain politicians and their supporters who basically become employees of these organizations and then protest on the street when you want to bring in new investments, when you want to reform things. So for a long time, this national asset has benefited few vested interest groups, but not the country. And these vested interest groups have continuously prevented this country from being able to benefit from the greatest natural resource Sri Lanka has, which is very unfortunate. And like you said, Jayamal, when the Indian subcontinent, when the global value chains comes to Indian subcontinent, Sri Lanka's Colombo port has a massive role to play because it has the best connectivity to the Indian subcontinent. And that means we have invested in hard infrastructure, but like I said, automation and efficiency and systems and processes is soft infrastructure. We have utterly and miserably failed to invest in soft infrastructure. And that is a big problem we are facing. So it's very important that we invest in soft infrastructure. In addition to that, another thing that we've failed is if you want to provide value-added logistics services around the port, we need to invest in warehousing and logistics parks. You may remember that we've spoken about logistics parks for a long time. We had plans, we had proposals, but we've never seen. So recently also I saw a Chinese investment into warehousing and logistics in Sri Lanka. We hope that it will materialize, but that's also another important area of investment that we've failed. So we really need to make our location work for us, and we have quite a lot to do so.
Right. So that was a very engaging conversation with Subhashini Abesinghe, Research Director attached to Verite Research. We were talking about how China's reputation as the global manufacturing hub has taken a hit, and many major firms are looking to relocate their supply chains to other countries such as India, and Sri Lanka and other South Asian nations will certainly benefit from this. But Sri Lanka, on its part, has a lot to do to obtain that advantage and also to grasp that opportunity by the neck and to make use of it. Thank you very much, Subhashini, for joining me this evening. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for tonight. Take care and have yourselves a great Friday night.